When would man cease to indulge in this most monumental of all errors? When would he cease to regard himself and his fellows as brute creatures to be beaten into line? He had to find the right answer before Oglethorpe and his kind found some flimsy validation for the one they had already chosen long ago. He stood up and glanced at the clock, deciding he wanted dinner, after all. Tomorrow he'd wire Betty and the kids to get packed and be on their way. No, he'd phone tonight. She had a right to know immediately the outcome of his interview. The dining room was almost empty. He ordered absently and clipped the speaker of his small personal radio behind his ear while waiting. He seldom used it, but here in the desert was a sense of isolation that made him seize almost compulsively upon any contact with the bright, distant world. The music was dull, and the news uninspiring. He was about to turn it off when his order arrived. The wine was very bad. The steak, however, was good, so Paul considered it about even. His finger touched the radio switch once more. The newscaster's voice changed its tone of pounding urgency. "Repercussions of the recent crash of the world's first space station are still being heard," he said. "Murmurs of protest against construction of a new wheel are rising in many quarters. Today they approach the proportions of a roar. The influential New England Times states that it is unqualifiedly opposed to any restoration of the wheel. In its 3 years' existence, the structure proved beyond any question of doubt its utter lack of utility. Now its fall to earth demonstrates the menace constituted by its presence over every city on the face of the globe." Senator Elbert echoes these sentiments. It was utter folly in the first place to spend billions of dollars to construct this sword of Damocles in the sky of all the world. I propose that our government go on record denying any further intention to rebuild such a threat to the peace and well-being of nations who stand now on the threshold of understanding and friendliness which they have sought for so long. Paul switched it off. He remembered the hours of worldwide tension while the wheel was falling toward the city of San Francisco. In panic, the whole population of the Bay Area attempted evacuation, but there wasn't time. The bridges became clogged with traffic, and some hysterical drivers left their cars and jumped to the waters below. As the wreckage neared Earth, the computers narrowed their circle of error until it was certain at last that the city would not be struck. But the damage was done. The fear remained, and now was congealing in angry determination that another wheel would not be built. Paul finished his meal, wondering what effect this would have on the plans to build a new wheel and on Project Superman. Maybe Congress would react in anger that would cut off all appropriations to the project. He wondered, in sudden weariness, if this would not be an unmixed blessing, after all. The next 3 days were spent in telephone and telegraph communication with members of his profession as he proceeded to recruit a staff. On Friday, Betty arrived with the kids. By the end of the following week, laboratory furniture had been installed and the first trickle of potential staff members was coming in to see what Superman was all about. Nat, too, had been busy forming his own staff and setting up basic equipment. Paul had the feeling that they were opposing camps setting up on the same site of exploration. He tried to tell himself it was completely irrational until Nat approached him a few days later. "Quite a crew you're getting in here," the technician said. "You'll have to take Oglethorpe up on his offer of new buildings if you expect to find couch space for all your boys." "That's what you're here for," Paul suggested mildly, "to do away with couches." "Right." Nat nodded. "Anything a couch can do, a meter can do twice as efficiently?" "Sometimes both are necessary. You forget my specialty is psychometry." "No, I'm not forgetting," said Nat. "But that's what makes it so hard for me to figure out. You're attempting to span two completely incompatible fields, science and humanities. Man behaves either as a machine or as a creature of unstable emotion. To function as one, you have to suppress the other. I'll make you a small side bet. We're going to have to work together on Superman and coordinate all our procedures and results. But I'll bet the final answer turns up on the side of a completely mechanistic man, shorn of all other responses and motivations. I'll take that, Paul said with a grim smile. I don't know how much of an answer we'll find, but I know that won't be it. Let's say a small celebration feed for the whole crew when Superman is completed. Nothing chintzy either. They shook on it, and afterward, Paul was glad the incident had occurred. It left no doubt about the direction Nat Holt would be traveling in his work. 4 weeks to the day, from the time Paul had stepped into Oglethorpe's office, he called the first meeting of his staff leaders. Invitations to the general and to Nat Holt were deliberately omitted. He wanted this first get-together to be a family affair. He felt just a little shaky in the knees as he got up before that group for the first time. I won't repeat what you already know, Paul said carefully. You all know the background events that produced Project Superman. I am sure that each of you has also caught the 2 basic errors that have been assumed by the Space Command. First, that an errorless man is possible, and second, that genuine scientific discovery can be secured wholly upon command. General Oglethorpe recognizes that we consider these assumptions erroneous, but he also knows that our professional integrity demands that we pursue vigorously a course which he believes will result in success. We recognize, too, that we are not here to invent or produce anything that does not already exist. But, in a sense, our superiors and some of our co-workers expect us to do exactly that. We can agree, however, that most of man's potential still remains to be discovered. And for us, who have hoped for a means of understanding that potential, this project is the fulfillment of dreams. If we fail to take full advantage of it, we will win the condemnation of our profession for a century to come. Space Command has already concluded that a man can be stripped of his humanity and driven to an utterly mechanistic state with the robotic responses of a machine. Let there be no mistake about it. We have been brought here to validate that conclusion. We will validate it by default, so to speak, unless we can produce a clean-cut analysis and demonstrations of the thing that most of us believe, that the essence of man is more than a piece of machinery or a collection of biochemical reactions. Our science of mind and man is on trial. If we fail, we give consent to a doctrine that will spread from space technology to all the rest of our society, and bind man in an iron mold that will not be broken for generations. While we have been hired and will ostensibly work at the task of developing an errorless man, our basic purpose must be to validate the humanity of man. He waited for their reaction. Outside, far across the open desert at the station, a rocket screamed into the air. They waited until the sound died away. Professor Barker stood up. There is scarcely a human being who has not by now read or heard the words of Captain West's appeal. They will be looking for the day when there will come marching from our laboratories, like a robot, the errorless man he asked for. Do you mean we have to fight the stated objectives of this project? Can we not discover sufficient understanding to establish some method of training which will accomplish in another way the things the Space Command needs? We are not fighting the Space Command's desire for more adequate men for its ships, said Paul. We are fighting only against the false conclusions they have already formed concerning the nature of such men. We must solve the problem of human error. We know its purpose in the learning process. We must discover the reason for its existence in a learned process. We have to find out what training actually means. We have to ask how we know when an error has been made. It is obvious, of course, when a spaceship rams a fixed orbit station. But what of the subtler situations where results are less dramatic or are postponed for a long time? The primary thing to remember at this point is that our basic goal is to prevent any false confirmation of the dogma that man is no more than a badly functioning machine, which will gain value when he has been tinkered with sufficiently so that he can slip in beside the gears and vacuum tubes and be indistinguishable from them. And to reach this goal, we must discover his true nature. It was 2 weeks later that General Oglethorpe made his first visit since Superman got underway. The soldier's face seemed more deeply lined and his eyes more tired than Paul remembered seeing them before.